When the radio crackled with "Unknown Shooter, Identify Yourself" across the blood-soaked ridgeline of Eagle's Perch, no one expected the quiet woman they'd dismissed all week to respond with 4 words that would save an entire Navy SEAL team and vanish into military legend. But to understand how Technical Sergeant Adriana "Whisper" Blackwood became a ghost story whispered in special operations circles, we need to go back to the scorching Tuesday morning when she first stepped off the supply helicopter at Forward Operating Base Scorpion's Den. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert heat shimmered off the tarmac like liquid mercury as the UH-60 Blackhawk settled onto the landing pad with a whine of turbine engines winding down. Dust devils swirled around the aircraft in lazy spirals, carrying the familiar cocktail of aviation fuel, hot metal, and the distinctive smell of a forward operating base that had seen too many rotations and not enough downtime. Technical Sergeant Adriana "Whisper" Blackwood stepped down from the helicopter's crew compartment, her single duffel bag slung over one shoulder with the kind of practiced efficiency that spoke of countless similar arrivals at countless similar outposts scattered across hostile territories. She paused for exactly 3 seconds at the edge of the landing zone, not from hesitation or uncertainty, but with the calculated assessment of someone who had learned to read the character of a place before committing fully to entering it. Her pale gray eyes swept the base perimeter with methodical precision, cataloging guard positions, sight lines, and the subtle details that revealed how seriously the personnel took their security protocols. The way sentries held their weapons, the positioning of defensive barriers, the degree of alertness in their posture, all information that might prove valuable later, filed away with the unconscious efficiency of someone whose survival had once depended on such observations. Forward Operating Base Scorpion's Den clung to a rocky outcropping in the desert mountains like a metallic parasite that had grown too comfortable in its hostile environment. Concrete barriers topped with razor wire formed irregular patterns around prefabricated structures that housed everything from command centers to mess halls. The base had that particular aesthetic of military functionality. Nothing beautiful, nothing comfortable, everything designed to serve a specific purpose with maximum efficiency and minimum cost. Solar panels glinted on rooftops, while communication arrays reached toward the cloudless sky like technological prayer wheels spinning endlessly in the thin air. Blackwood's gear was different from the typical deployment loadout, though the differences were subtle enough that casual observers might miss their significance entirely. Her rifle case was longer than standard issue, custom foam padding visible through the partially open zipper. Her boots showed the kind of meticulous care that spoke of someone who understood that equipment maintenance could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. A small notebook protruded from her left breast pocket, edges worn smooth from constant handling, filled with what appeared to be technical specifications written in handwriting so precise it resembled mechanical drafting rather than casual note-taking. No unit patches decorated her uniform beyond the basic identifiers required by regulation. No deployment badges told stories about where she had served or what operations she had supported. No photographs were tucked into her helmet band or taped to her weapon case. Nothing invited questions about her background or suggested she felt any need to establish her credentials through visible symbols of past achievements. She carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and feeling no compulsion to prove it to anyone else. You Blackwood? The voice belonged to First Sergeant Derek Quinn, a career Marine whose weathered face and deliberate movements suggested someone who had seen enough combat to understand the difference between looking tough and actually being dangerous. He approached with the measured gait of a professional evaluating a new addition to his operational environment. Technical Sergeant Blackwood, First Sergeant. she replied, her voice carrying just enough respect to acknowledge his rank without any of the performative deference that might suggest weakness or uncertainty. The handshake was brief, firm, professional, exactly what it needed to be and nothing more. Quinn glanced at her personnel file, though she suspected he had already memorized the relevant details before her arrival. Says here you're being attached to us for specialized support operations. That's pretty vague, even by military standards. It usually is, Blackwood replied simply, offering no elaboration or explanation. The kind of response that could indicate either classified operations or administrative bureaucracy, leaving Quinn to draw his own conclusions about which interpretation seemed more likely based on his assessment of her competence and bearing. The first sergeant studied her for a moment longer, taking in details that most people would miss entirely. The way she stood, with her weight slightly forward on the balls of her feet. The manner in which her eyes continued scanning their surroundings even during conversation. The fact that she had positioned herself with clear sight lines to multiple exits and defensive positions, without appearing to think about it consciously. These were the habits of someone who had operated in environments where situational awareness was not optional. Well, Sergeant, welcome to the Scorpion's Den. It's not the Ritz, but it keeps the bad guys on the outside and the good guys breathing on the inside, which is about all we can ask for out here. Quinn gestured toward the main cluster of buildings. Chow hall's that way, armory's over there, and your billet assignment should be waiting at the admin office. Anything else you need to know? The high ground, Blackwood said quietly, her gaze settling on the ridgeline that dominated the terrain east of the base. Who controls Eagle's Perch? Quinn followed her line of sight, his expression shifting subtly as he processed the strategic implications of her question. Most new arrivals asked about internet access, meal schedules, or recreation facilities. Very few immediately focused on the strategic terrain features that could determine whether the base survived contact with serious opposition. We maintain observation posts up there on rotation. SEAL team runs most of the long-range reconnaissance missions in that sector. Lieutenant Commander Vincent Hayes leads that particular group of snake eaters, and they're pretty territorial about their area of operations. Something flickered across Blackwood's expression. Not quite amusement, not quite resignation, but perhaps a combination of both. The look of someone who had encountered territorial special operations personnel before and found the experience educational in ways that were not always pleasant. I'm sure they are, she murmured, shouldering her duffel bag and preparing to navigate whatever bureaucratic maze awaited her integration into the base's operational structure. But as she walked toward the administrative buildings, her eyes returned once more to Eagle's Perch, studying the terrain with the kind of professional interest that suggested she saw possibilities others might miss. Behind her, First Sergeant Quinn remained on the landing pad for several minutes after her departure, his weathered features creased in thought. Something about Technical Sergeant Blackwood did not quite fit the standard profile of support personnel typically assigned to forward operating bases. The way she moved, the questions she asked, the subtle confidence in her bearing all suggested capabilities that went far beyond whatever vague description appeared in her official assignment orders. But in a profession where secrets were as common as sand and twice as difficult to pin down, Quinn had learned not to dig too deeply into mysteries that might be better left undisturbed. Some people carried their qualifications in their personnel files. Others carried them in the careful economy of their movements and the professional competence of their questions. Technical Sergeant Blackwood clearly fell into the latter category. As the afternoon heat reached its brutal peak and the base settled into the rhythm of another day in hostile territory, none of the personnel going about their routine duties could have imagined that they had just witnessed the arrival of someone who would within 72 hours fundamentally alter their understanding of what real expertise looked like when it chose not to announce itself. The legend of Eagle's Perch was about to be written, though the woman who would author it with precision fire and 4 legendary words had just disappeared into the administrative maze of forward operating base Scorpion's Den, carrying her secrets as quietly as she carried everything else. The mess hall at Forward Operating Base Scorpion's Den buzzed with the controlled energy of military personnel refueling between operations. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across steel tables, where conversations mixed tactical planning with complaints about the perpetual shortage of decent coffee. The air carried the familiar aroma of institutional cooking, not terrible, not great, but adequate fuel for bodies that demanded calories more than culinary excellence. Technical Sergeant Blackwood moved through the chow line with the same methodical efficiency she applied to everything else, selecting her meal with minimal consideration and carrying her tray to an empty table near the rear wall. She positioned herself with her back to concrete and clear sightlines to both entrances, a habit so deeply ingrained it required no conscious thought. The table's location also offered excellent acoustics for monitoring conversations throughout the facility without appearing to eavesdrop. "Fresh meat," announced a voice that carried the particular brand of arrogance that seemed to be standard issue for certain types of special operations personnel. Master Chief Petty Officer Jordan Mills approached with the swagger of someone who had never met a room he couldn't dominate through sheer force of personality. His uniform bore the crisp perfection of someone who understood that appearance was often as important as competence in establishing hierarchies. Mills was built like a recruiting poster. Broad shoulders, narrow waist, arms that spoke of countless hours in makeshift gyms carved out of shipping containers. His face carried the kind of weathered confidence that came from surviving multiple deployments in hostile environments, though whether that survival was due to exceptional skill or exceptional luck remained to be determined by careful observation. "Technical Sergeant Blackwood," he announced loudly enough to draw attention from surrounding tables. "Heard you're our new support specialist. What kind of support are we talking about exactly? Filing, data entry, making sure our equipment requisitions get processed on time?" The comment drew chuckles from his audience, a collection of Navy SEALs who had positioned themselves strategically throughout the mess hall like a pack establishing territorial dominance. Their leader, Lieutenant Commander Vincent Hayes, watched the interaction with the detached amusement of someone evaluating entertainment rather than engaging in professional dialogue. Hayes possessed the kind of lean, predatory build that suggested someone who had been forged by years of specialized training in field operations. His eyes held the calculating intelligence of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions with incomplete information, though those same eyes currently reflected the casual dismissal of someone who had already categorized Blackwood as irrelevant to his operational concerns. "Support operations cover a wide range of activities," she replied simply, continuing to eat her meal with the same steady rhythm she maintained in all activities. Her voice carried no defensiveness, no wounded pride, no attempt to establish credentials through verbal sparring. Just professional acknowledgement, delivered in a tone that suggested the conversation held minimal interest for her. "I bet they do," Mills continued, his voice rising slightly to ensure the performance reached its intended audience. "Probably involves a lot of computer work, right? Database management, maybe some light clerical duties when things get busy?" Petty Officer First Class Caleb Foster leaned forward from a nearby table, his grin suggesting someone enjoying the show. "Hey, Chief, think she's ever been outside the wire? Or is this her first deployment to somewhere without air conditioning and room service?" The laughter that followed was ugly, not born from genuine humor, but the pack mentality that emerges when predators sense what they believe to be weakness. It was the sound of men who had forgotten that competence often wore different faces than they expected, and that assumptions based on appearances could prove catastrophically wrong. Blackwood glanced up from her meal for exactly 3 seconds, her pale gray eyes meeting Mills's gaze with the kind of absolute stillness that comes from complete confidence in your own capabilities. Not angry, not amused, not intimidated, just present. The kind of presence that makes primitive parts of the brain uneasy without the conscious mind understanding exactly why. "First deployment?" she asked, quietly, returning her attention to her food. "No, not quite." Something in her tone suggested depths that Mills was not equipped to plumb, but his ego was too loud to hear the warning clearly. He interpreted her quiet response as confirmation of his assumptions rather than evidence that he might be operating with incomplete information. "Well, don't worry about it, Sergeant," Hayes interjected from across the room, his command voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. We'll try to keep the real operations quiet so they don't interfere with your administrative duties. Wouldn't want the sound of actual combat to disturb your paperwork. The comment drew more laughter, the sound echoing off concrete walls and creating an atmosphere that felt more like a high school cafeteria than a professional military environment. But there was something else underneath the crude humor, a systematic campaign to establish exactly where Blackwood stood in their carefully constructed hierarchy. Petty Officer Second Class Mason Rivers, the youngest member of their group, seemed almost uncomfortable with the casual cruelty on display, but he was too junior to object and too invested in his own acceptance to risk challenging the established dynamic. He shifted in his seat and focused on his meal, avoiding eye contact with anyone while the performance continued around him. "Speaking of real operations," Mills announced, clearly warming to his role as primary antagonist, "we've got a reconnaissance mission heading up to Eagle's Perch tomorrow morning. You know what that is, right? It's that big rocky thing you can see from here if you look really hard. Probably not the kind of terrain they cover in administrative school." Blackwood looked up again, this time allowing her gaze to linger on the ridgeline visible through the mess hall's reinforced windows. Her expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind her eyes. Professional interest mixed with what might have been calculation. "Looks like challenging terrain," she observed quietly. "Good field to fire, but limited approach routes. Easy to get pinned down if you choose the wrong position." The comment drew more laughter, the sound echoing off concrete walls and creating an atmosphere that felt more like a high school cafeteria than a professional military environment. But there was something else underneath the crude humor, a systematic campaign to establish exactly where Blackwood stood in their carefully constructed hierarchy. The dismissal was complete, systematic, and absolutely devastating to any possibility of professional collaboration. They had categorized her, filed her away, and dismissed her as irrelevant to their operational concerns. She was background noise now, not a threat worth watching, not a resource worth consulting, just another support person counting days until rotation ended. That was exactly how she wanted it. But while they performed for each other with increasing arrogance, she gathered intelligence with the methodical efficiency of someone who had learned that preparation could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Their approach routes, their communication protocols, their contingency plans, all discussed within her hearing as if she were part of the furniture, rather than a trained military professional with her own specialized expertise. It was the first of many mistakes they would make over the next 48 hours, though none of them were yet capable of recognizing the magnitude of their error. The pre-dawn briefing room at Forward Operating Base Scorpion's Den hummed with the particular energy that preceded high-stakes operations. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across topographical maps, spread like surgical instruments across metal tables. Lieutenant Commander Vincent Hayes stood at the front of the room with the commanding presence of someone who had led men through hostile territory enough times to understand exactly what was required for success. "Eagle's Perch reconnaissance, 0530 departure," Hayes announced, his voice carrying the crisp authority that had been honed through years of briefing rooms and operational environments. "Intelligence suggests increased enemy activity in the sector. We need eyes on their movement patterns and communication infrastructure." Master Chief Mills leaned over the terrain model with the focused attention of someone who understood that details saved lives. "Primary observation post here," he indicated, pointing to a rocky outcropping that dominated the ridgeline. "Secondary fallback position approximately 800 meters northwest. Communication check every 30 minutes. Petty Officer Foster traced potential approach routes with his finger, his tactical knowledge evident in the way he automatically identified covered positions and natural choke points. Insertion via the eastern approach minimizes exposure time, but extraction could get complicated if we take contact from the high ground. That's why we don't plan on taking contact," Hayes replied, with the confidence of someone who believed superior training and equipment could overcome most environmental disadvantages. "Get in, gather intelligence, get out. Clean and professional." Technical Sergeant Blackwood sat in the corner of the briefing room, ostensibly present to provide administrative support for the mission documentation. Her official role was to ensure proper paperwork was completed and filed according to regulation, the kind of bureaucratic necessity that operational personnel tolerated rather than embrace. She had positioned herself with typical care, back to the wall, clear sightlines to all entrances, within hearing range of all tactical discussions. Her notebook lay open on her lap, filled with what appeared to be routine administrative notes written in her characteristic precise handwriting. But anyone capable of reading upside down and possessing sufficient tactical knowledge might have noticed that her notations focused less on bureaucratic requirements and more on the operational details being discussed with increasing casualness by the SEAL team. Approach routes, communication frequencies, extraction protocols, contingency plans, all information that should have been restricted to essential personnel, but was being shared freely in her presence because they had already decided she posed no operational security risk. Just another support person whose presence was required by regulation, but whose input was neither requested nor desired. Weather forecast shows clear skies, Petty Officer Rivers added, consulting his tablet with the methodical attention of someone responsible for environmental factors that could impact mission success. Visibility will be excellent, which works for us and against us, depending on who's doing the observing. Hayes nodded approvingly at his junior officer's tactical awareness. Exactly right. We'll have superior observation capabilities, but will also be more visible to anyone scanning the ridgeline with decent optics. Blackwood's pen moved across her notebook in small, precise strokes that might have been mistaken for bureaucratic documentation by casual observers. But her pale gray eyes tracked every detail of the tactical discussion with the focused attention of someone who understood that missions succeeded or failed based on factors that briefing rooms could only approximate. The terrain model showed Eagle's Perch in clinical detail, elevation markers, vegetation patterns, natural cover, and exposed approaches, all rendered with the precision that modern military intelligence gathering could provide. But models could not convey the reality of wind patterns that affected ballistics calculations, or the way desert heat created atmospheric distortions that impacted long-range observation, or the subtle environmental factors that could turn routine reconnaissance into life-or-death emergencies. Enemy capabilities assessment, Mills asked, though his tone suggested the question was more procedural than genuinely concerned.
Standard insurgent small arms, possibly some crew-served weapons, Hayes replied, consulting his intelligence brief. Nothing we haven't dealt with before, local fighters with more enthusiasm than training. Foster grinned with the confidence of someone who had faced similar opponents and found them wanting. Sounds like a routine intelligence gathering operation. Should be back in time for decent chow and maybe some rack time before the next tasking. But Blackwood's expression had shifted slightly as she processed the intelligence assessment. Not concern exactly, but the kind of professional attention that suggested she was evaluating information against experience that might not align perfectly with official estimates. Her pen paused for a moment before continuing its precise documentation of details that officially did not require her input or analysis. Rules of engagement remain standard, Hayes continued. Observe and report. Avoid contact unless absolutely necessary. We're gathering intelligence, not starting wars. Rivers nodded with the earnestness of someone still young enough to believe that operations proceeded according to plan with predictable regularity. Understood, sir. Maintain operational security, minimize signature, complete mission objectives. The briefing continued with the methodical thoroughness that characterized professional military planning. Equipment checks, communication protocols, medical contingencies, and extraction procedures all covered with the attention to detail that separated elite units from average formations. But underneath the professional competence was an undercurrent of casual confidence that suggested they viewed this mission as routine rather than potentially dangerous. Questions? Asked Hayes, scanning the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had conducted countless similar briefings and expected the same level of professional understanding from his personnel. Negative, sir, came the unanimous response from his team members, their voices carrying the confident assurance of men who believed their training and experience were adequate for whatever challenges they might encounter. Hayes turned toward Blackwood with the kind of perfunctory attention that regulations required, but genuine interest did not support. Sergeant, any administrative requirements we need to address before departure? All documentation appears complete, she replied in the same measured tone she maintained for all professional interactions. Mission parameters are within established guidelines. What she did not mention were the tactical concerns that her experience suggested might prove relevant. The way the proposed observation post created potential crossfire vulnerabilities, or how the communication schedule might not account for atmospheric conditions that could affect signal propagation, or the possibility that enemy capabilities had been underestimated based on intelligence that might be outdated or incomplete. Such observations were not requested, would not be welcomed, and could potentially compromise the carefully constructed dynamic that kept her invisible and underestimated. Better to remain silent and prepare for contingencies that professional optimism preferred to ignore. Outstanding, Hayes concluded, beginning to gather his materials with the efficient movements of someone transitioning from planning to execution. Wheels up in 30 minutes, standard loadout, extra batteries for communication equipment, and remember, we're ghosts until mission completion. As the SEAL team filed out of the briefing room with the purposeful energy of men preparing for operations they had conducted dozens of times before, Blackwood remained seated for several minutes longer, her notebook still open, her pen moving in precise patterns across the page. But now her notations had nothing to do with administrative requirements and everything to do with tactical contingencies that might become relevant when optimistic planning encountered unforgiving reality. Approach routes that could become kill zones, extraction points that could be compromised by enemy observation, communication vulnerabilities that could isolate the team when they most needed support, preparation for possibilities that no one wanted to consider but experience suggested might prove catastrophically important.
The pre-dawn darkness at Forward Operating Base Scorpion's Den carried the particular quality of desert air before sunrise, crisp, thin, and charged with the kind of anticipatory energy that preceded high-stakes operations. The SEAL team moved through their final preparations with the methodical efficiency of professionals who had performed these rituals countless times across multiple deployments and hostile environments. Lieutenant Commander Hayes conducted his final equipment inspection under the harsh glare of portable work lights, his hands moving with practiced confidence across weapons systems, communication gear, and survival equipment. Each piece of kit was examined not just for presence, but for proper function and optimal configuration. Lives depended on equipment reliability, and Hayes had lost enough good men to preventable failures to take anything for granted. "Comms check," Master Chief Mills announced, keying his radio with the kind of precise timing that had become second nature through repetition in environments where communication failures meant death. "Base, this is Viper 1, radio check. Over." "Viper 1, base, read you 5 by 5, came the immediate response from the operations center, the voice carrying the alert professionalism of personnel who understood their role in keeping operational teams alive and mission capable. Petty Officer Foster adjusted his night vision equipment with the careful attention of someone who had learned that small details could determine mission success or catastrophic failure. The devices were delicate, expensive, and absolutely critical for navigating hostile terrain in conditions where natural light was insufficient for safe movement. One minor malfunction could compromise the entire operation. "Weather update shows continued clear skies," Petty Officer Rivers reported, consulting his tablet one final time before securing it in his equipment pack. "Temperature dropping to optimal range for extended observation. Visibility should remain excellent throughout the operational window." The helicopter crew completed their pre-flight inspection with the same attention to detail that characterized every aspect of the mission preparation. Rotors, engine systems, navigation equipment, and defensive countermeasures all received thorough examination because aviation accidents in hostile territory rarely offered second chances or rescue opportunities. Technical Sergeant Blackwood observed the departure preparations from her assigned position near the operations center,
ostensibly present to ensure proper documentation and communication protocols were maintained throughout the mission. Her official role was administrative, monitoring radio traffic, updating mission status reports, and ensuring proper channels were informed of operational developments. But her pale gray eyes tracked every detail of the team's preparation with the focused attention of someone who understood that lives often depended on factors that briefing rooms and planning sessions could only approximate. The way they distributed equipment weight, their choice of ammunition loadout, the configuration of their communication systems, all details that revealed their tactical priorities and potential vulnerabilities. Her notebook lay open beside the radio equipment, officially designated for administrative logging, but actually serving as a repository for tactical observations that might prove relevant when optimistic planning encountered unforgiving reality. Frequency assignments, backup communication protocols, medical evacuation procedures, information that support personnel were expected to track, but not analyze. "Mount up," Hayes commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone transitioning from preparation to execution. The team moved toward their helicopter with the purposeful efficiency of men who had performed similar insertions enough times to make the process appear routine rather than inherently dangerous. The UH-60 Blackhawk lifted off precisely on schedule, its turbine engines whining against the pre-dawn darkness as it climbed toward the ridgeline that dominated the eastern horizon. Navigation lights blinked in steady patterns while the aircraft transitioned from the relative safety of the base perimeter to the uncertain environment of hostile territory. "Viper 1 airborne," Mills reported over the radio, his voice clear and professional despite the ambient noise of helicopter operations. "Proceeding to insertion point. Estimated time of arrival, 15 minutes. From the operations center, Blackwood monitored the radio traffic with the systematic attention that characterized all her professional activities. But beneath the surface of administrative compliance was a deeper level of analysis that her official position did not require, but her experience suggested might prove valuable.
The communication schedule was optimistic, assuming atmospheric conditions would remain stable throughout the operational period. The extraction contingencies were adequate for routine scenarios, but might prove insufficient if the team encountered serious opposition. The intelligence assessment seemed confident about enemy capabilities, but confidence based on incomplete information could prove catastrophically wrong. Viper 1, base. She keyed the radio with the measured precision that had become automatic through years of similar operations. Confirm primary frequency backup and alternate extraction coordinates. Base, Viper 1, primary backup frequency 77.5, alternate extraction grid November Victor 8742. Foster responded immediately, his voice carrying the professional competence of someone who understood that communication failures in hostile territory were often permanent. The helicopter's progress across the desert terrain was tracked through multiple systems: GPS coordinates updated every 30 seconds, visual confirmation from base observation posts, and regular communication checks that confirm the aircraft remained mission-capable and on schedule. Modern military operations left little to chance when it came to maintaining contact with deployed personnel. 2 minutes to insertion, the pilot announced over the internal communication system, his voice carrying the focused calm of someone who had performed similar operations enough times to maintain professional composure even in inherently dangerous situations. Hayes conducted his final team check with the methodical thoroughness that separated elite units from average formations. Equipment status, ammunition count, communication functionality, medical supplies. Every detail that could affect mission success received final verification before commitment to hostile territory. "Remember, we're ghosts," he reminded his team, his voice cutting through the helicopter noise with command authority. "Observe, document, report. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We get the intelligence and get out clean." The insertion proceeded exactly according to plan, fast, professional, and apparently undetected by hostile forces in the operational area.
The helicopter departed immediately after personnel deployment, leaving the four-man SEAL team alone in terrain that looked deceptively peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness. Viper 1, base. Insertion complete, Hayes reported as the aircraft noise faded into distance. Beginning approach to observation post. Next scheduled communication in 30 minutes. From the operations center, Blackwood logged the transmission with routine administrative precision while her mind processed tactical factors that her official position did not require her to consider. The team was now committed to a course of action based on intelligence assessments and planning assumptions that might or might not prove accurate when tested against reality. Weather conditions could change rapidly in desert mountain terrain. Enemy capabilities might be more sophisticated than intelligence suggested. Communication systems could fail due to atmospheric interference or equipment malfunction. Extraction procedures might be compromised by factors that planning sessions could not anticipate. But these concerns were not hers to voice officially. Her role was to monitor, document, and maintain communication links that would allow higher headquarters to track mission progress and coordinate support if required. The SEAL team's tactical competence was their responsibility, not hers. The next 30 minutes passed with the routine tension that characterized monitoring operations in hostile territory. Regular position updates, weather observations, and system status checks created the steady rhythm of professional military operations conducted according to established protocols and proven procedures. Viper 1, base, approaching observation post. Mills reported exactly on schedule, his voice carrying the focused calm of someone who had reached the critical phase of a carefully planned operation. Initial assessment shows no immediate threats in sector, proceeding to establish overwatch position. Everything was proceeding according to plan, which in military operations often represented the calm before storms that no amount of planning could fully anticipate or prevent. But high above the desert floor, in terrain that offered excellent observation capabilities and equally excellent opportunities for fatal miscalculation, the SEAL team was about to discover that enemy capabilities and tactical awareness had been significantly underestimated by intelligence assessments that looked impressive in briefing rooms, but proved inadequate when tested against reality.
The first indication that the morning's operation was deviating from its carefully planned trajectory came at exactly 06:47 hours, when Petty Officer Foster's routine communication check carried an undertone of tension that professional ears recognized immediately as the sound of men discovering that reality did not match their expectations. Base, Viper 1, we have movement in Sector 7, Foster reported, his voice maintaining the professional calm that elite military units practiced until it became automatic, even under stress. Multiple personnel appears to be coordinated patrol activity. Estimate 12 to 15 individuals with military-grade equipment. From the operations center at Forward Operating Base Scorpion's Den, Technical Sergeant Blackwood felt something cold settle in her stomach as she processed the tactical implications of the report. The intelligence assessment had predicted minimal enemy presence in the operational sector, perhaps a few scattered insurgents with small arms and limited training. Coordinated patrol activities suggested a level of organization and capability that had not been accounted for in the mission planning. Viper 1, base, copy movement report, she responded, her voice carrying the measured professionalism that masked growing concern about factors that briefing rooms had failed to consider adequately. Maintain observation and report composition and equipment assessment. Lieutenant Commander Hayes moved his team to their primary observation post with the fluid efficiency of men who had practiced such movements until they required no conscious coordination. The rocky outcropping provided excellent concealment and superior fields of view, but it also created the kind of tactical constraints that could transform routine reconnaissance into life-or-death emergencies if circumstances changed unexpectedly. Base, Viper 1, enemy personnel appeared to be conducting systematic search patterns, Master Chief Mills reported 15 minutes later,
his voice carrying the focused calm of someone who had begun to recognize that their morning was becoming significantly more complicated than anticipated. Equipment includes crew-served weapons, advanced communication systems, and what appears to be counter-surveillance capabilities. Blackwood's pen moved across her administrative log with mechanical precision, while her mind processed tactical realities that her official position did not require her to analyze, but her experience suggested were becoming critically important. Systematic search patterns indicated professional training. Crew-served weapons meant serious firepower. Counter-surveillance capabilities suggested the enemy was actively looking for exactly the kind of observation post that the SEAL team had just established. Viper 1, base, recommend maintaining low profile and continuing observation, she transmitted, following established protocols, while privately calculating extraction routes and emergency procedures that might become necessary if the situation continued to deteriorate. Higher headquarters has been notified of changed enemy composition. But even as she spoke the words, Blackwood knew that higher headquarters was at least 30 minutes away from meaningful tactical support, and the helicopter extraction that had deposited the team was already committed to other operational requirements. If the situation on Eagle's Perch became kinetic, the SEAL team would be isolated with limited options and facing enemy capabilities that exceeded their planning assumptions. Movement increasing, Petty Officer Rivers whispered over the radio, his voice carrying the particular tension of someone who had begun to understand that they were no longer the hunters in this particular equation. Count now approximately 20 personnel, moving in coordinated formations with disciplined communication procedures. The tactical picture was developing in ways that no one in the operations center wanted to acknowledge explicitly, but which everyone with relevant experience was beginning to recognize that the SEAL team had inserted into an area where enemy forces were conducting active operations with professional competence and superior numbers. Their observation post, which had seemed advantageous during planning, was becoming a potential trap if hostile forces decided to sweep the high ground systematically. Base, Viper 1, we may have been compromised, Hayes transmitted at 07:15, his command voice carrying the kind of controlled urgency that indicated situations were approaching critical thresholds. Enemy movement patterns suggest they are aware of observation activities in this sector.
Blackwood's administrative logging had transformed into tactical analysis as she tracked the developing situation with a focused attention of someone who understood that men's lives depended on decisions being made with incomplete information under time pressure. The communication schedule was becoming irregular as the team prioritized tactical considerations over administrative requirements. Equipment reports suggested they were conserving battery power for potential emergency situations. Personnel status updates indicated elevated stress levels that professional training was managing but not eliminating. Viper 1, base, extraction helicopter is committed to priority tasking until 0900 hours, she transmitted, delivering information that everyone understood meant the team was essentially on their own until the tactical situation stabilized or became desperate enough to justify emergency intervention. Alternate extraction procedures are being coordinated through higher headquarters. The next 20 minutes passed with the kind of escalating tension that characterized military operations when careful planning encountered unforgiving reality. Radio traffic became more frequent as the enemy patrol activity increased in intensity and focus. Equipment status reports indicated the team was preparing for potential contact while hoping to avoid it. Position updates suggested they were considering displacement to alternate observation posts if their current location became untenable. Base, Viper 1, we have a problem, Mills transmitted at 0742, his voice carrying the particular quality of professional acknowledgement that bad situations were becoming worse. Enemy forces are establishing blocking positions on our primary extraction routes. We may need immediate support if this situation develops further. In the operations center, Blackwood felt the familiar sensation of watching a tactical situation spiral beyond the control of planning assumptions and optimistic assessments. The enemy was demonstrating capabilities that intelligence reports had not predicted. The SEAL team was isolated in terrain that was becoming increasingly hostile. Support assets were committed elsewhere and might not be available when they became critically necessary.
Viper 1, base. Higher headquarters is coordinating emergency support procedures, she responded, following established protocols while knowing that emergency support might arrive too late to affect the immediate tactical situation. Maintain position and report any change in enemy activity or team status. But maintaining position was becoming an increasingly untenable option as enemy forces demonstrated tactical awareness that suggested professional training and operational experience. The systematic search patterns were tightening around the observation post. The blocking positions were being established with disciplined precision. The counter-surveillance capabilities were probably already focused on the exact terrain where the SEAL team was attempting to remain invisible. Movement, 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 Foster transmitted at 0758, his voice tight with the particular stress of men who had realized they were about to transition from observers to participants in ways that their mission planning had hoped to avoid. Multiple enemy personnel moving directly toward our position. Estimate 5 minutes before contact becomes unavoidable. The morning's routine reconnaissance mission had transformed into something entirely different. A survival scenario where 4 highly trained professionals were about to face superior numbers with limited support and constrained tactical options. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong simultaneously, and the carefully constructed illusion of operational control was about to be shattered by the kind of reality that no amount of planning could completely prevent. In 60 seconds, the first shots would be fired, and Technical Sergeant Blackwood would have to decide whether to remain an administrative observer or become something entirely different. The first rifle crack echoed across Eagle's Perch at exactly 0800 hours, shattering the desert morning silence like glass breaking in a cathedral. The sound carried the particular authority of professional marksmanship, not the wild spray of untrained fighters, but the deliberate precision of someone who understood ballistics, wind compensation, and the art of placing bullets exactly where they needed to go. "Contact! Contact! Contact!" Master Chief Mills shouted into his radio, his voice carrying the controlled urgency of men who had transitioned instantaneously from observation to survival. "Taking effective fire from multiple positions, we are pinned down and need immediate support." The SEAL team's carefully planned observation post had become a death trap in the space of 30 seconds. Enemy forces had approached with professional discipline, established overlapping fields of fire, and initiated contact with the kind of tactical coordination that spoke of extensive training and combat experience. The intelligence assessment's confident predictions about local fighters with more enthusiasm than training were being proven catastrophically wrong by bullets that struck within inches of their intended targets. "Viper 1, base, copy contact report," Technical Sergeant Blackwood responded from the operations center, her voice maintaining professional calm while her mind raced through tactical options that seemed increasingly limited with each passing second. "Emergency extraction procedures are being initiated. Maintain position and return fire as necessary." But maintaining position was becoming impossible as enemy fire intensified with systematic precision. The rocky outcropping that had provided excellent concealment for observation now offered minimal protection against coordinated assault from multiple directions. Lieutenant Commander Hayes and his team were discovering the harsh reality that defensive positions optimized for one tactical scenario could become fatal liabilities when circumstances changed unexpectedly. "Base, Viper 1, we have casualties," Petty Officer Foster transmitted, his voice tight with the particular stress of men watching teammates fall under effective enemy fire. "Rivers is down, bleeding badly. We need immediate medical evacuation and close air support. Our position is becoming untenable." In the operations center, Blackwood felt the familiar cold calculation that came with watching tactical situations spiral beyond the control of planning assumptions and optimistic assessments. The helicopter extraction was still 90 minutes out. Close air support was committed to priority missions in other sectors. Ground reinforcements would require at least 2 hours to reach Eagle's Perch, even if they departed immediately. The SEAL team was effectively alone, facing superior numbers with professional capabilities, while one of their members bled out on desert rock under increasingly accurate enemy fire. "Viper 1, base, helicopter extraction is en route but remains 60 minutes out," she transmitted. Delivering information that everyone understood meant the team might not survive long enough to benefit from official support. "Ground reinforcements are being coordinated, but will require extended time to reach your position." The next 10 minutes passed with the escalating desperation of men discovering that their training, equipment, and tactical competence might not be sufficient to overcome the mathematical reality of being outnumbered by professionally competent opponents in terrain that favored the attackers. Radio communications became fragmented as the team prioritized immediate survival over administrative reporting. Movement on the eastern approach, Hayes reported, his command voice carrying the focused calm of someone who had accepted that the situation was critical and required extraordinary measures to prevent complete disaster. But breakout maneuvers required covering fire, tactical coordination, and movement opportunities that the current situation did not provide. The enemy had established overlapping fields of fire that turned any movement into potential suicide. The wounded team member could not be moved without medical support that was not available. The tactical options were narrowing with each passing minute. Base, Viper 1, ammunition status becoming critical, Mills transmitted at 08:15, his voice carrying the professional acknowledgement that desperate situations were becoming hopeless. We need immediate fire support or we will be overrun within 30 minutes. And that was when the morning took a turn that no one in the operations center, no one in higher headquarters, and certainly no one among the enemy forces surrounding the SEAL team could have predicted or prepared for.
The first enemy fighter dropped at precisely 08:17 hours, a single precise shot that removed him from the battlefield with surgical efficiency. The shot came from an angle that suggested elevation and distance far beyond the SEAL team's current position. Professional marksmanship that spoke of capabilities and equipment that exceeded anything the surrounded team possessed. "What the hell was that?" Foster whispered over the radio, his voice carrying the particular confusion of men who had just witnessed something that did not fit their tactical understanding of the current situation. The second enemy fighter fell 30 seconds later, another precise shot that eliminated a key position in the coordinated assault, then a third. Each shot placed with the kind of mathematical precision that spoke of someone who understood ballistics at a level that went far beyond basic marksmanship training. Viper 1, base, are you engaging targets from alternate positions? Blackwood transmitted, though she knew the answer even as she asked the question. The SEAL team was pinned down and fighting for survival. They possessed neither the position nor the equipment necessary for the kind of long-range precision fire that was systematically dismantling the enemy assault. "Negative, base," Hayes responded, his voice carrying the bewildered acknowledgement of men who were receiving fire support from an unknown source. "We have unknown friendly providing overwatch, precision fire from elevated position approximately 1,000 meters northwest of our location." In the operations center, Blackwood felt something shift in her chest. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. The kind of professional acknowledgement that came from understanding that someone with exceptional capabilities was operating in the battle space, though their identity and intentions remained unclear. The systematic elimination of enemy positions continued with mechanical precision. Each shot carefully calculated, each target selected for maximum tactical impact, each engagement conducted with the kind of disciplined fire control that spoke of someone who understood that ammunition was finite and every round needed to count. "Enemy assault faltering," Mills reported, with growing amazement, his voice carrying the particular relief of men who had been expecting to die and were discovering that survival might be possible after all. "Unknown shooter is providing precision fire support that's breaking up their coordinated attack." But even as the immediate tactical situation stabilized, larger questions remained unanswered. Who was providing fire support from a position that official records showed was unoccupied? How had someone with professional-grade marksmanship capabilities reached an observation post that required technical climbing skills and extensive technical knowledge to access? "Viper 1, base, we need to identify our fire support," Hayes transmitted, his command voice carrying the professional concern of someone who understood that unknown variables in tactical situations could prove as dangerous as known threats. Blackwood checked her administrative logs, communication records, and personnel tracking systems with methodical efficiency.
Every military asset in the operational area was accounted for and assigned to specific missions. No sniper teams were operating independently. No reconnaissance elements were positioned in the terrain that could provide the kind of precision fire support that was saving the SEAL team's lives. Viper 1, base, negative on official friendly forces in your sector, she transmitted, her voice carrying the professional confusion of someone who is witnessing tactical capabilities that did not appear in any official documentation or operational planning. And that was when Lieutenant Commander Hayes made the decision that would transform a routine military operation into a legend that would be discussed in special operations circles for decades to come. He keyed his radio and transmitted the question that would change everything. Unknown shooter, identify yourself. The response, when it came, would be delivered in 4 words that would save their lives, challenge their assumptions, and create a story that would be told and retold until it became part of military folklore.
The radio silence stretched for exactly 17 seconds. 17 seconds that felt like 17 hours to men who were bleeding on desert rock, while enemy forces regrouped for what might be their final assault. 17 seconds during which everyone in the operations center at Forward Operating Base Scorpion's Den held their breath and waited for an answer that might explain how someone with professional-grade marksmanship capabilities had materialized in terrain that official records showed was unoccupied. When Technical Sergeant Adriana Blackwood's voice finally crackled across the radio frequency, it carried the same measured calm she had maintained throughout her administrative duties. But underneath that professional composure was something else entirely. The quiet authority of someone who had stopped pretending to be anything other than what she actually was. Ghost 77, I've got you covered. 4 words, delivered without drama, without flourish, without any attempt to maximize their psychological impact. Just a simple statement of tactical reality that changed everything the SEAL team thought they knew about their situation, their support, and the quiet woman they had dismissed as administrative dead weight throughout the week. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stared at his radio handset, as if the device had suddenly begun speaking in an ancient language he had never learned but somehow understood perfectly. Ghost 77 was a call sign that carried weight in special operations circles, the kind of designation that was whispered rather than spoken aloud, associated with operations that did not appear in official documentation, and personnel who had learned to operate in the spaces between what was officially acknowledged and what was operationally necessary. Ghost 77, Viper 1, he transmitted, his command voice carrying a note of something that might have been professional respect or might have been simple amazement. Confirm your position and status. Are you the shooter providing fire support? Affirmative, Viper 1, came the immediate response, delivered with the kind of tactical confidence that only emerged from someone who had been trained to levels that exceeded standard military requirements. I have Overwatch position approximately 1200 meters northwest of your location. Enemy forces are regrouping for assault. Recommend immediate displacement to Rally Point Alpha. From her elevated position on the ridgeline that dominated Eagle's Perch, Blackwood adjusted her scope with movements that had been refined through thousands of hours of practice in environments where precision meant survival and failure meant consequences that could not be corrected through second chances. Her rifle was not standard issue. A custom system optimized for the kind of extreme long-range engagement that required understanding of ballistics, atmospheric conditions, and target behavior at levels that went beyond basic marksmanship training. She had been observing the tactical situations since before dawn, tracking enemy movement patterns with the systematic attention of someone who had learned to gather intelligence through methods that left no signature and created no evidence of observation. When the SEAL team had established their observation post, she had already been in position for 6 hours, invisible and patient, waiting to see how the morning would develop. The decision to intervene had not been tactical, it had been personal. These were American soldiers facing superior numbers with professional capabilities, and she possessed both the position and the equipment necessary to affect the outcome.
The mathematics were simple enough that they required no complex analysis. 4 good men were going to die, unless someone with exceptional capabilities chose to act. Ghost 77, Viper 1, what is your unit assignment? Hayes asked, though part of him suspected the answer would raise more questions than it resolved. We show no friendly sniper teams operating in this sector. Independent contractor. Blackwood replied using the euphemism that covered a multitude of operational realities that official documentation preferred not to explicitly acknowledge. Currently attached to your base for administrative support. Happened to be in the area when you needed fire support. Master Chief Mills keyed his radio with the particular urgency of someone who had moved beyond curiosity about administrative details and was focused entirely on immediate tactical realities. Ghost 77, can you provide covering fire for team displacement? We have 1 casualty who needs immediate medical attention. Already tracking your movement requirements, she responded, her voice carrying the systematic competence of someone who had analyzed the tactical situation and developed solutions while other people were still trying to understand the scope of the problem. Enemy sniper position eliminated 30 seconds ago. You have approximately 4 minutes of clear movement before they reconstitute their overwatch capability.
The precision of her tactical assessment was more disturbing than reassuring. Someone operating independently had managed to identify and eliminate threats that the SEAL team had not even detected, using capabilities that exceeded anything in their standard operational toolkit. The implications were staggering for men who had built their professional identity around being the most capable individuals in any tactical environment. Movement, 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 Hayes commanded, initiating the displacement that would extract his team from their compromised position, while the unknown sniper, Ghost 77, Technical Sergeant Blackwood, whoever she actually was, provided the kind of professional fire support that was saving their lives. The team moved with desperate efficiency, carrying their wounded teammate while navigating terrain that offered minimal concealment from potential enemy observation. But every time hostile forces attempted to reestablish firing positions, precise shots from the ridgeline eliminated them with mathematical regularity. Not wild suppressive fire, but carefully calculated shots that removed specific threats with minimum ammunition expenditure. Ghost 77, Viper 1, your fire support is keeping us alive, Foster transmitted as they reached the designated rally point, his voice carrying the particular gratitude of men who understood that someone else's competence was the only thing standing between them and catastrophic failure. How did you know we would need support? Experience, came the simple response, delivered without elaboration or explanation. Enemy capabilities in this sector have been underestimated for several weeks. Intelligence assessments were optimistic rather than realistic. Hayes felt something cold settle in his stomach as he processed the implications of that statement. If Technical Sergeant Blackwood, Ghost 77, had known that enemy capabilities exceeded intelligence estimates, why had her concerns not been incorporated into their mission planning? Why had someone with clearly exceptional tactical knowledge been relegated to administrative duties while they planned operations based on information she apparently knew to be inadequate? Ghost 77, why weren't these intelligence concerns raised during mission briefings? He asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer and would not like it when it was confirmed explicitly. The radio silence stretched for almost 30 seconds before Blackwood's response crackled across the frequency, carrying a note of dry amusement that somehow managed to be more devastating than anger would have been. Administrative personnel don't get invited to tactical planning sessions, Commander. You made that quite clear during the briefing when you dismissed me as irrelevant to operational considerations. The words landed with the impact of precision fire, striking directly at the assumptions and professional arrogance that had led them to dismiss someone whose capabilities might have prevented the entire crisis. Hayes felt the particular shame that comes from recognizing that your own prejudices and institutional blindness had nearly gotten good men killed. Ghost 77,
Request immediate extraction to base, he transmitted, his command voice carrying a note of professional respect that had been entirely absent from his previous interactions with the woman who had just saved his team's lives. Negative, Viper 1, came the response, delivered with the same measured calm that had characterized all her communications. I have alternate transportation arrangements. You focus on getting your wounded teammate to medical support. Ghost 77 is going off comms. And with those words, Technical Sergeant Adriana Blackwood disappeared from the official record of the morning's operation as completely as she had materialized when her capabilities became necessary for survival. The radio frequency fell silent except for routine coordination between the SEAL team and their incoming extraction helicopter. But the implications of what had occurred would resonate through special operations communities for years to come. The story of how someone, dismissed as administrative dead weight, had possessed capabilities that exceeded anything in their operational toolkit and had chosen to use those capabilities to save lives rather than prove points or settle scores. The legend of Ghost 77 had been born in 4 words and 17 seconds of radio silence, created by someone who understood that real strength often chose not to announce itself until circumstances made demonstration unavoidable.
The UH-60 Blackhawk thundered across the desert terrain at maximum speed, its turbine engines screaming against the morning air as the crew raced to extract a SEAL team that had survived an engagement no one fully understood. The pilot pushed the aircraft beyond normal operational parameters, understanding that men were bleeding on hostile ground while enemy forces regrouped for what might be their final assault attempt. Viper 1, dust-off 7-2, 2 minutes to extraction, the pilot transmitted, his voice carrying the focused professionalism of someone who had performed similar rescues often enough to understand that timing was measured in seconds rather than minutes when lives hung in the balance. Lieutenant Commander Hayes pressed his field dressing against Petty Officer Rivers's chest wound while scanning the horizon for any sign of renewed enemy activity. The tactical situation had stabilized, but stabilization was temporary in hostile territory where enemy capabilities had already exceeded intelligence estimates by dangerous margins. Copy, dust-off 7-2. Hayes responded, his command voice steady despite the chaos of the previous hour. Landing zone is secure. Casualties are stable for transport. Be advised, we had unknown friendly providing fire support during engagement. From her elevated position on the ridgeline, Technical Sergeant Blackwood maintained overwatch through her rifle scope, tracking movement patterns in the valley below with the methodical attention of someone who understood that enemy forces rarely abandoned operational objectives simply because initial assaults had failed. Her custom rifle remained trained on potential approach routes while her mind calculated extraction scenarios and contingency plans. The helicopter's approach created a dust storm that reduced visibility to near zero, but Blackwood's elevated position allowed her to monitor the broader tactical picture while the SEAL team focused on immediate evacuation procedures. Through her scope, she could see enemy personnel maintaining observation positions at extreme range, waiting to see how the rescue operation would unfold. Dust-off 7-7, ghost 7-7, she transmitted on the emergency frequency, her voice cutting through the rotor noise with professional clarity. Be advised, you have potential hostile observation from ridgeline southeast of landing zone. Recommend rapid extraction with immediate departure to avoid indirect fire. The pilot acknowledged her warning with the kind of professional respect that helicopter crews reserved for ground personnel who provided actionable intelligence rather than unnecessary chatter. Copy, Ghost 7-7, extracting rapidly and departing to the northwest. Master Chief Mills helped load Rivers into the helicopter while Foster provided security overwatch, their movements efficient despite the physical and emotional exhaustion of men who had spent the morning facing their own mortality. The wounded SEAL was conscious and stable but required immediate medical attention that only the base hospital could provide. Ghost 7-7, Viper 1, Hayes transmitted as the helicopter spun up for departure. What is your extraction plan? We can provide transport to base. The response came immediately, delivered with the same measured professionalism that had characterized all her communications throughout the crisis. Negative, Viper 1. I have alternate transportation. Focus on your wounded teammate. Hayes wanted to press the issue to demand answers about who Ghost 7-7 actually was and how someone with her capabilities had been operating independently in their operational sector.
But Rivers needed medical attention more than Hayes needed administrative clarity, and the helicopter was already lifting off with the urgency that characterized emergency medical evacuations. As the aircraft climbed away from Eagle's Perch, Hayes caught a final glimpse of the ridgeline through the crew compartment window. For just a moment, sunlight reflected off what might have been optical equipment positioned among the rocks at extreme range. Then, the helicopter banked toward forward operating base Scorpion's Den, and the terrain fell away beneath them like a tactical problem that had been solved through methods no one fully understood. Viper 1, base, confirm extraction complete. Came the radio call from the operations center, where personnel had been tracking the emergency through multiple communication channels and coordination systems.
Base, Viper 1, extraction complete with one casualty requiring immediate medical attention, Hayes responded, his voice carrying the particular exhaustion of men who had survived situations that could easily have ended differently. We need immediate debrief with intelligence personnel regarding enemy capabilities that exceeded assessment parameters. But even as he spoke the words, Hayes knew that the most important intelligence from the morning's operation would not appear in any official debrief or after-action report. Ghost 77 had demonstrated capabilities that suggested backgrounds and training that went far beyond anything in standard military documentation. And she had chosen to use those capabilities to save lives rather than advance careers or settle professional scores. The flight back to base took 12 minutes, during which Rivers received medical attention from the crew, while Hayes and his remaining team members processed what had occurred in ways that official military language could not adequately capture. They had been saved by someone they had dismissed, protected by capabilities they had not recognized, and rescued from consequences of their own professional arrogance. Dustoff 7-2, base, medical personnel standing by for immediate casualty treatment, the air traffic controller transmitted as they approached the landing zone. Emergency surgical team is prepared for trauma intervention. The helicopter touched down with the controlled urgency that characterized military medical evacuations, and Rivers was transferred to waiting medical personnel with the efficiency that spoke of procedures practiced until they became automatic under stress. His vital signs were stable, the bleeding was controlled, and the prognosis was favorable for someone who had been bleeding on desert rock an hour earlier. "Sir," Petty Officer Foster approached Hayes as they watched the medical team transport Rivers toward the base hospital. "What do we tell the debrief team about Ghost 77? Officially, she doesn't exist in our operational sector." Hayes considered the question while processing implications that went far beyond administrative convenience. Someone with exceptional capabilities had operated independently to save American lives, using methods and equipment that suggested backgrounds he was not cleared to know about. The official record would show that the SEAL team had survived enemy contact through superior training and tactical competence, but the reality was far more complex and professionally humbling. "We tell them exactly what happened," he replied, his command voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned that honesty was more valuable than professional convenience. Unknown Friendly provided fire support during enemy contact. Identity and unit assignment remained to be determined through proper channels. But as they walked toward the debriefing facility, Hayes knew that proper channels would probably never identify Ghost 77 or explain how Technical Sergeant Blackwood possessed capabilities that exceeded anything in their operational toolkit. Some people carried their qualifications in personnel files that could be reviewed and evaluated. Others carried them in skill sets that could only be demonstrated when circumstances made concealment impossible. The morning's operation had taught him that competence often wore different faces than he expected, and that assumptions based on appearances or administrative assignments could prove catastrophically wrong when tested against reality. Ghost 77 had reminded him that the most dangerous people in any environment were often those who felt no need to prove themselves until lives depended on their capabilities. Back on Eagle's Perch, the ridgeline stood empty except for scattered equipment and the kind of silence that follows violent action. If someone had been providing overwatch from elevated positions, they had departed as quietly and efficiently as they had arrived, leaving no evidence of their presence beyond the tactical results of their intervention. The legend was already beginning to form in the conversations between crew members, intelligence personnel, and medical staff who had participated in the morning's operation.
Stories about mysterious fire support and unknown operators would spread through military communication networks with the kind of rapid propagation that characterized tales worth telling. The rescue is complete, but questions remain about Ghost 77's identity and background. The stage is perfectly set for Part 9, where the team returns to base and confronts what they missed. Ready for Part 9 when you signal. But the woman who had authored those stories with precision fire and professional competence had already disappeared into whatever operational reality had brought her to Forward Operating Base Scorpion's Den in the first place, carrying her secrets as quietly as she carried everything else.
The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Scorpion's Den buzzed with the controlled tension that followed operations where official reports would necessarily omit the most important details. Lieutenant Commander Hayes sat across from Major Lisa Brennan, the base intelligence officer, while Master Chief Mills and Petty Officer Foster provided supporting testimony about an engagement that had challenged every assumption they had made about enemy capabilities and friendly assets. "Let me understand this correctly," Major Brennan said, reviewing her notes with the methodical attention of someone who understood that after-action reports required precision even when the facts seemed to defy conventional military logic. "An unknown sniper provided fire support that allowed your extraction, but this individual was not part of any official operation in your sector?" Hayes nodded, his expression carrying the particular frustration of someone who possessed incomplete information about events that had saved his team's lives. "Affirmative, ma'am. Call sign Ghost 77 provided precision fire support from an elevated position approximately 1,200 meters from our location. Without that intervention, we would have been overrun." "And you have no knowledge of this individual's unit assignment or operational authority?" Brennan pressed, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer would raise more questions than it resolved. "The operator identified as an independent contractor currently attached to this base for administrative support," Mills interjected, his voice carrying a note of professional respect that had been entirely absent from his previous discussions about base personnel. "Claimed to have been in the area when we required assistance." Major Brennan felt something shift in her understanding as she processed the implications of that statement. Independent contractors with sniper capabilities were not randomly assigned to forward operating bases for administrative duties. The operational security requirements alone would prevent such assignments unless the individual possessed clearances and backgrounds that went far beyond standard military documentation. "Administrative support," she repeated slowly, her mind working through personnel rosters and assignment records that might explain how someone with clearly exceptional capabilities had been integrated into base operations without her knowledge. "Do we have anyone currently assigned to administrative duties who might possess relevant qualifications?" The question hung in the air for several seconds before Hayes provided the answer that would transform their understanding of the morning's events and force them to confront their own professional blindness. "Technical Sergeant Blackwood arrived 3 days ago with orders for specialized support operations," he said quietly, his command voice carrying the weight of someone who had begun to recognize the magnitude of his assumptions and their nearly catastrophic consequences. "We assigned her to routine administrative duties because her paperwork was vague about specific qualifications." Foster shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the memory of his dismissive comments about desk work and computer skills creating the kind of professional embarrassment that came from recognizing how completely he had misjudged someone whose capabilities exceeded anything in their operational toolkit. "Technical Sergeant Adriana Blackwood," Major Brennan confirmed, pulling up personnel files on her computer with growing certainty that the morning's mystery was about to be resolved in ways that would prove professionally humbling for everyone involved. Her original military occupational specialty was designated as Special Operations Support, but her assignment history includes units that have been disbanded, programs that have been classified, and operations that do not appear in conventional databases. Hayes felt the familiar cold sensation that came with recognizing that institutional assumptions and casual dismissal had nearly cost lives because professional arrogance had blinded them to resources that might have prevented the entire crisis. "Ghost operations," Mill said quietly, his voice carrying the recognition of someone who had finally understood why Technical Sergeant Blackwood had moved with such economy and spoken with such precise tactical knowledge.
black budget programs that got shut down when funding priorities changed.
Foster felt something heavy settle in his stomach as he processed the implications of what they were learning. Someone with elite operational training had been assigned to their base, dismissed as irrelevant to their tactical concerns, and relegated to administrative duties because they had been too professionally arrogant to recognize competence that did not announce itself through conventional channels. "Where is Technical Sergeant Blackwood now?" Hayes asked, though part of him suspected the answer would prove as mysterious as everything else about the morning's operation. Major Brennan consulted her personnel tracking systems with growing confusion that suggested the answer would not be found in conventional administrative databases. According to base records, she completed her assigned duties and departed on scheduled transportation approximately 2 hours ago. "Departed to where?" Mills pressed, his voice carrying the urgency of someone who understood that questions were multiplying faster than answers were emerging. "Transportation manifest shows departure via helicopter to an undisclosed destination," Brennan replied, her tone reflecting the kind of professional frustration that came with discovering that official records contained gaps that could not be filled through conventional channels. "The flight plan was classified above my clearance level." The debriefing room fell into the kind of profound silence that occurred when military professionals realized they had been operating with incomplete information about resources that might have been available for their missions. Technical Sergeant Blackwood had possessed capabilities that could have prevented their crisis, but institutional blindness and casual dismissal had ensured those capabilities remained unused until circumstances made concealment impossible. "Sir," Foster said quietly, his voice carrying the particular shame of someone who had recognized his own role in creating the conditions that had nearly proven fatal. "We never gave her a chance to contribute to mission planning. We dismissed her as administrative deadweight before we even knew what she was capable of." Hayes nodded with the grim acknowledgement of someone who understood that leadership failures had consequences that extended far beyond hurt feelings or wounded pride. "We made assumptions based on appearances and paperwork instead of evaluating actual competence. Those assumptions nearly got good men killed." Major Brennan closed her files with the methodical precision of someone who understood that official reports would necessarily contain gaps that could not be filled through conventional investigation. "The after-action report will note that unknown friendly forces provided fire support during enemy contact. The specific identity and unit assignment of Ghost 77 will remain classified pending further investigation." But everyone in that debriefing room understood that further investigation would probably yield nothing more than additional questions about programs that no longer existed officially and personnel who had learned to operate in the spaces between what was acknowledged and what was necessary. "There's something else," Hayes said quietly, his command voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned lessons that would reshape his approach to leadership and professional evaluation. Before she disappeared, Ghost 77 mentioned that enemy capabilities in this sector have been underestimated for weeks. She knew the intelligence assessments were inadequate. The implications of that statement settled over the room like smoke from a fire that no one had noticed was burning. Someone with access to more accurate intelligence had been present during their mission planning, but institutional hierarchies and professional dismissal had prevented that information from being incorporated into their operational assumptions. "We had the resources we needed," Mill said slowly, his voice carrying the particular weight of recognition that came from understanding how completely they had failed to utilize available expertise. "We just couldn't see them because we were looking in the wrong places and making the wrong assumptions about what competence looks like." The debriefing concluded with more questions than answers, but with a fundamental shift in understanding about the dangerous assumptions that could blind military professionals to the capabilities of those around them. Technical Sergeant Blackwood had reminded them that real expertise often chose not to announce itself until circumstances made demonstration unavoidable. And sometimes, in a profession built on hierarchies and conventional thinking, that quiet demonstration of genuine excellence provided the most powerful education of all. 6 months after the engagement at Eagle's Perch, the story of Ghost 77 had spread through special operations communities with the kind of viral propagation that characterized tales worth preserving in military folklore. The official after-action report remained classified, but the unofficial account had been told and retold in mess halls, briefing rooms, and quiet conversations between professionals who understood that some lessons were more valuable than official documentation. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stood before a new group of SEAL candidates at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Coronado, California, his weathered face carrying the weight of someone who had learned that competence often wore different faces than institutional thinking expected. The morning's instruction focused on tactical assessment and resource utilization, but the real lesson was about the dangerous assumptions that could blind professionals to capabilities that might be hiding in plain sight. How many of you have worked with support personnel who seemed underqualified for their assignments? He asked the assembled candidates, watching hands rise throughout the classroom with predictable regularity. And how many of you took the time to evaluate their actual capabilities rather than making judgments based on paperwork or first impressions? The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable, the kind of quiet that emerged when people realized they were about to confront their own professional limitations and institutional blindness. Let me tell you about Technical Sergeant Adriana Blackwood, Hayes continued, his command voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived situations that fundamentally changed his understanding of leadership and tactical assessment. Call sign Ghost 77. The story unfolded with the methodical precision that characterized professional military instruction, each detail carefully selected for maximum educational impact. The dismissive treatment during initial assignment, the systematic marginalization during mission planning, the casual assumptions about capabilities based on administrative roles rather than actual competence, and then the morning when those assumptions had nearly proven fatal, prevented only by someone who possessed skills that exceeded anything in their operational toolkit but had chosen to remain invisible until lives depended on her intervention. 4 words, Hayes emphasized, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that legends were often built from moments that lasted only seconds but created consequences that endured for decades. Ghost 77, I've got you covered. That's all it took to save 4 American lives and teach us that we had been operating with dangerous blindness about our own resources. Across the country, similar conversations were occurring in different military facilities as the story of Eagle's Perch became part of the informal curriculum that shaped how military professionals thought about competence, respect, and the identification of genuine expertise in environments where appearances could be deceiving. Master Chief Mills, now serving as an instructor at the Army Ranger School, had incorporated the lesson into his leadership seminars with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had learned that professional humility was more valuable than institutional arrogance. The most dangerous mistake you can make as a leader, he told his students, is assuming that you know everything about the people under your command based on their paperwork or their assignment. Real competence doesn't always announce itself, and the person who could save your life might be the same person you've been dismissing as irrelevant to your operational concerns. But despite the widespread circulation of the story, Technical Sergeant Adriana Blackwood herself remained as mysterious as she had been during her brief assignment to Forward Operating Base Scorpion's Den. Military personnel databases contained no current assignment information. Special operations communities had no official knowledge of her whereabouts or operational status. She had disappeared as completely as if she had never existed, leaving behind only the tactical results of her intervention and the educational impact of her example. Petty Officer Foster, now a first class and serving with a different SEAL team, carried a different perspective on personnel evaluation that had been forged through the recognition of his own professional failures. During pre-deployment briefings, he made it his responsibility to ensure that support personnel were treated with the respect that professionals deserved, regardless of their official assignments or apparent qualifications.
You never know who might save your life, he would tell junior personnel who seemed inclined toward the same casual dismissal that had nearly proven fatal at Eagle's Perch. The person filing your paperwork might be the same person who pulls you out of a tactical nightmare when everything else goes wrong. The medical personnel who had treated Rivers during his recovery had their own version of the story, focused on the professional competence that had kept him alive during the engagement and extraction. The precision of the field medical care he had received suggested that someone with advanced trauma training had been providing guidance during the crisis, though official records showed no medical personnel in the operational area. Someone knew exactly how to control bleeding and maintain airway function under combat conditions, the base surgeon had noted in her unofficial discussions about the case. The field care he received was textbook perfect, which probably made the difference between survival and catastrophic blood loss. But perhaps the most significant impact of the Ghost 77 legend was not in the tactical lessons or professional development it provided, but in the fundamental shift it created in how military personnel thought about the identification and utilization of human resources in operational environments. Training programs began incorporating scenarios where critical capabilities were deliberately concealed or assigned to unexpected personnel. Leadership courses emphasized the importance of comprehensive personnel assessment rather than assumptions based on official documentation. Tactical planning sessions included protocols for identifying and utilizing all available expertise, regardless of its official designation or institutional recognition. The story had become more than military folklore. It had evolved into an educational tool that challenged fundamental assumptions about how competence was identified, respected, and utilized in professional environments where lives depended on making correct assessments about human capabilities. Years later, when military historians attempted to document the unofficial lessons that had shaped special operations training and leadership development, the Eagle's Perch engagement would be cited as a watershed moment when institutional thinking was forced to confront the limitations of conventional wisdom about personnel evaluation and tactical resource assessment. But the woman who had authored that moment with precision fire and 4 legendary words remained as elusive as desert wind. Her true identity and subsequent activities known only to whatever agencies or programs had originally shaped her exceptional capabilities. Ghost 77 had become exactly what her call sign suggested, a presence that had appeared when needed, accomplished what was necessary, and disappeared into whatever operational reality required her skills elsewhere. The legend endured because it captured something essential about the nature of genuine competence and the dangerous assumptions that could blind professionals to resources that might be hiding in plain sight. In a military culture that often confused rank with capability and official recognition with actual expertise, Technical Sergeant Adriana Blackwood had provided a reminder that real strength often chose not to announce itself until circumstances made demonstration unavoidable. And sometimes, in environments where lives depended on making correct assessments about human capabilities, that quiet demonstration of genuine excellence was the most powerful lesson of all. The kind of education that changed not just how people performed their duties, but how they understood the very nature of competence, leadership, and the courage required to remain humble in the face of extraordinary capabilities. The Ghost 77 legend would be told and retold for generations, growing stronger with each iteration, becoming part of the informal wisdom that shaped how military professionals thought about the people around them and the assumptions that could prove either life-saving or catastrophically wrong when tested against unforgiving reality. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.